Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, as the case may be. My name is Randy Mason, and I'm the faculty director of Penn Weitzman School of Design's Center for the Preservation of Civil Rights Sites. And I'm happy to welcome you all to the first installment in fall 2022 of our dialogue series, wherein we talk with scholars who are doing exciting and path-breaking work in various aspects of heritage related to civil rights and to Black experiences. Today, we are delighted to kick off the fall series with Professor Tara Dudley from University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. The way that that we'll have this afternoon's dialogue proceed is just as we usually do, as a pretty informal conversation with Professor Dudley. I'll give a quick introduction, and while I'm introducing, or while we're conversing, you are very welcome to put questions or comments in the Q&A tab. If you'd direct all your notes to the Q&A tab, then they'll be all waiting for us to turn to when in 45 minutes or so, when we finish the conversation part of the afternoon and get to the comments and questions. So again, thank you all for joining us. And Professor Dudley, if you'll allow me to just give a few facts of your introduction before we start off. I won't read a terribly formal introduction, but everyone should know that you are an assistant professor at UT Austin School of Architecture, teach a number of different things, including interior design, history, and I think very notably to our work and our typical audiences. In addition to your academic credentials, PhD and master's from UT Austin, undergraduate degree from Yale, a number of book prizes.
Oh, no, I have to stop you there. Undergraduate degrees from Princeton.
Oh my gosh, sorry. Being from only Penn and Columbia, I always mix up the other Ivies sorry to offend everyone now, but everyone from Yale and Princeton. I apologize for that slip. The actual point I was trying to make was, in addition to all your scholarly achievements, you have a really deep professional record of doing preservation practice with a bunches of different kinds of clients and different kinds of reports. And that combination particularly is super important, makes it even more important for us to hear about your work and what you have worked on, what you will work on next. So again, just thank you for taking the time to join us. Given both the really practical and scholarly sides of your professional career, I wonder if you could just start off by talking about your career and how you got connected to this kind of work and how you've made the decisions to do different kinds of work at different times, and just kind of how you see your trajectory looking backward at a few years.
Certainly. Once upon a time, if someone had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have never said an architectural historian or historic preservationist. I would have not known what either of those things was, for a number of reasons. And, there was an interest in art and design. And once upon a time in high school, I did want to be an interior designer. But for various numbers of reasons, including the fact that Princeton did not have an interior design program, that was not the major that I ended up studying. And so I was an art history major, and just really enjoyed that. Had some fantastic professors and even, TAs that really inspired me in that field. And that led me to experiences in various museums, including the Cooper Hewitt and the Met in New York. And ultimately, after I graduated, I had a 6-month internship at the Met, but then was thinking at that time that I didn't necessarily want to be a curator. I didn't want to be a registrar. Some of the more administrative kinds of museum work, as far as art history museums, did not appeal. Although I did have a really unique experience. The museum had just, they were in the beginning stages of what was called the Audience Development Initiative at the time. And they had previously done work, I believe, with the Asian American community, and was in the midst of kicking off the participation with the African American community. And the intent of that initiative was to diversify the visitorship of the museum so that it was more reflective of the demographics of New York City. And so the museum was seeking to do this by engaging with various civic and community organizations within various ethnic and racial groups in New York City. And so coming on board with that, I sort of had my foot in two areas. So I was working with the Audience Development Initiative coordinator, who was pretty much housed in the membership and development areas, but also my sort of regular internship, where I was working with one of the curators in American art, American decorative arts. And so I had a really wonderful and very diverse experience as far as the possibilities of the museum world and that kind of work. But again, I didn't want to be a curator. I didn't want to be a registrar or anything like that. And New York was really expensive. And so I was getting ready to move back home. I'm a native of Lafayette, Louisiana, and just kind of almost serendipitously in the trip to the Met Library with one of my friends, came across a magazine or journal called Aviso, and basically had jobs in the museum world. And I was flipping through while she was researching something else and discovered that the Shadows on the Teche, which is a National Trust for Historic Preservation site in Liberia, Louisiana, had an internship, and it was a graduate internship. I was not in graduate school. I was not applying to graduate school, had no intent to go to graduate school at that time. But nevertheless, I threw my hat in the ring and ultimately secured that internship. So I was brought back home. I had never actually visited this particular site, this museum, which is in 1830s antebellum plantation, or the sort of city plantation of a fairly well-to-do family of Iberia Parish, and had a really wonderful experience there. So I got to be involved with educational programs, giving tours. They had previously had a historic furnishings report written, but certain aspects of that had not yet been implemented. And so I was able to participate in a major way in that endeavor. And then also wrote a guidebook on the historic interior so that, folks visiting the site could have a broader understanding of the chronology of the interior. So some of my interest in interiors came back in that way. And so it was slowly, figuring out that I could combine, these areas of study. And even with backtracking a little bit, my undergraduate thesis at Princeton was about the transformation, essentially, of the Cooper Hewitt from a private home from Andrew Carnegie's house into a museum, a historic house museum, a design museum. And there was an significant architectural component, actually won an architecture prize for that work, even though I was not in the School of Architecture. I was not an architectural historian per se, even though I guess I was learning how to be one at that time. But it was actually at the Shadows and looking through probably Preservation magazine during Preservation Month that I learned that there were such things as graduate programs in historic preservation. And that ultimately brought me to the University of Texas. I had also applied to Winter Tour in their wonderful program in the study of American decorative arts, as well as the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which really appealed to me because it had components of a preservation program that were really specific to historic interiors. But luckily, I landed at the University of Texas, where I was pursuing my master's degree in historic preservation. And then upon completing that degree, decided to pursue my PhD in architectural history. But in the midst of that graduate study, when I was looking for a job, a local CRM, historic preservation firm, was looking for interns for a project. And so I applied, I got that internship, and they liked me, so they kept me. And I ultimately ended up having a fairly significant, a really long career at HHM and Associates, and ultimately transitioned full-time to academia in 2019. Before then, I'd been teaching at least half of the interior design history sequence, thanks to my relationship with the former director of the interior design program and my interest in that work, and then the need of the School of Architecture, before teaching both halves of that course and developing others as I became a full-time professor in the School of Architecture. So that's a kind of roundabout and the shortest kind of version of how I've ended up today, where I am with kind of hats all over the place, but being an academic and a practitioner of preservation as well.
I'll encourage folks to go to your UT Austin faculty page, where there is a where it says straight out that you went to Princeton, which I obviously can't read that word, but there's a long list of the professional projects as well as of all your publications, so that the details are all there, and it's super impressive. The one aspect of your story, I think, is what that has relevance to all of us, probably in slightly different ways, is that the way the professions are set up is to make distinctions between different kinds of heritage or different aspects of heritage, whether it's museums versus interiors versus architecture versus landscape architecture, and on and on. And we all have our individual kind of frustrations with that. But as we tell our stories, and I was thinking about mine as you were telling yours, that those stories work because they ignore those boundaries. I think it's an important note for current graduate students or folks considering some kind of career in the field, is that the disciplines in and of themselves don't have the answer, and you're likely to cross some of those boundaries in your career, as certainly as you have.
Absolutely.
So I would love to ask you to talk next about your book on New Orleans, which is extraordinary in a bunch of different ways, and it clearly comes out of your interest in interiors, but I think it has a lot to say to those of us who are interested in urbanism and landscape. And I never would have picked up a book. I typically wouldn't pick up a book that is kind of rooted in interiors, but yours has so much to say, and the way that you framed it and the way that you wrote it is so interesting and atypical. I wonder if you could just talk about the kind of the subject and the approach through the lens of these families, which is really extraordinary.
Definitely. So building Antebellum New Orleans came out of my PhD dissertation. And I just, it's funny, in sort of learning to be an architectural historian within an academic field, at the same time that I was working part-time at HHM was very interesting, and just not being sure what would be appropriate topic and what my committee would approve and all that kind of thing. And initially, I think I was going to write on some aspect of, early 20th century. So among the first professional African-American architects. But I'd written a paper for a class that Dr. Richard Cleary taught on architecture in the age of revolution. And so I ultimately decided to write this paper, my term paper, on to see if I could find contributions to architecture in Louisiana, more specifically New Orleans, as a result of the Haitian Revolution. Well, by virtue of the lack of things that had been taught in my education, that became very clear that there were contributions. And so I just wanted to know more about the influence of the gens de couleur libre, the free people of color, on architecture in New Orleans. And so I got approval for this topic. So I was really hesitant for whatever reason, but all of my advisors were very willing for me to pursue that work. And I started off sort of collecting and gathering and being a sponge of information, secondary source information and archival information by first, one thing that I did was went through the New Orleans architecture series that had been published by the Friends of the Cabildo and actually still has volumes currently being published on different areas of New Orleans. But I went through those and basically pulled out all of the references to free people of color as either builders or property owners or people who commissioned buildings. And so I had this huge spreadsheet. And so I presented this as part of my initial dissertation colloquium for the approval of the topic. And one of the questions was, well, how are you going to narrow this down? And among the individuals or families that stood out to me were the Doliol and Souvier families, which ultimately they served out, they ended up being kind of the perfect foils, because you have one family who stayed in New Orleans, who has descendants in New Orleans, and the other family, the Souvier family, between the 1830s and the 1870s, you had members of that family who slowly immigrated to France and passed into white society. And so it was by looking at those two families and their work as builders, as property owners, and as really entrepreneurs, and really important civic figures, community figures in the community of free people of color, that I was able to explore those contributions and this kind of process that became apparent to me, by which not only the Doliols and Souliers, but free people of color in general engaged with the built environment to really set up and enhance their community in New Orleans and in Louisiana. And, I think in a very interesting way, that process and that methodology that I created could be used to look at other communities of free people of color, and easily as I looked at the Doliols and the Souliers, additional families of color, even individuals of color. One thing that's kind of coalescing in the back of my brain as I'm thinking about and pursuing other projects is, it'd be really easy to create some kind of multi-volume something on any number, easily a dozen individuals or families of free people of color, and explore their contributions and really look at the primary source material to dig out specific examples of buildings that they contributed to where they own property, and just the sheer amount of that contribution, the significance of it was quite amazing.
And they're untouched archives of those folks as well?
No, they're not per se, or that I know of. It was really interesting in looking for the Souliers. The Historic New Orleans collection does have several of their ledger books, because in addition to being engaged with the built environment, two of the brothers were also commission merchants. And you see something, that diversification of economy sort of within those families is something that was fairly common. You have other free people of color who were also like tailors, for example, and engaged in other trades or areas of commerce. And so with those Soulier family ledgers, they're including, all of their business transactions, including property transactions, rents that they were accruing from the properties they own. So for example, that's how I was able to identify some of the properties that weren't, for example, in the Vieux Carré in the French Quarter, so they wouldn't be in the Vieux Carré survey. And then after my dissertation was written, but luckily I was able to include some of that in the book. There was a letter book that was discovered, and so I'll be doing future research with that, because it's not a work that sort of just is complete. A couple of years after I submitted my dissertation, a Soulier descendant, and I tried to track down family members, but thank goodness for UT Libraries and my dissertation being available electronically. One of the family members came across my dissertation and contacted me, and we're hoping to pursue a more in-depth sort of transatlantic history of the Soulier family. Talk about their connections in New Orleans, and then what happened to them when they left for France, and so on and so forth. And until that time, I had no photographs, images, likenesses of members of either family, and was able to see some photographs and obtain those of the first generation members of the Soulier family. So
fantastic.
It's been a very rewarding work that continues to give. That's
great. And I think again, some of the from a more self-indulgent standpoint, it gave me I didn't read it in New Orleans, but that would have been even more powerful. But even from my perspective, as not thinking about first and foremost about the materiality of the buildings and the interiors, it really gave me another way into understanding what is always held up as both an extraordinary but also like typical American city. So I think it was just an amazing addition to to the literature as I understand it on New Orleans. Though I'm not a student of New Orleans, I'm a, as an architectural and urban historian, I just I was really drawn in by the stories and as well as the methods.
No, thank you. I mean, there really were just so many layers that I was able to get at, from very specific resources and, biographical or genealogical information about the families to thinking about New Orleans as a whole in this really transitional period, not only in American history, but for the city of the history of that city as well.
Yeah. So I wanted to pivot to something that that relates a little bit more to a question that relates a little bit more to our center, and to ask you to reflect on it in against the experience of doing this book in particular, but all of your other preservation work. So when we created this center and named it Center for the Preservation of Civil Rights Sites, we meant to start off a conversation about like, what is civil rights? And in light of the history of civil rights in this country, what is a site? What constitutes a site? And then once we have a conception of that, what do we mean by preserving those sites? Because as has been well established by an amazing array of scholars in Africana studies and Black geography and such, the physical remainders or the forms of heritage related especially to Black experiences, but other non-dominant experiences as well, usually or doesn't always take the form of a building or a piece of land or an artifact whose authorship can be easily traced. So we, to me, and I think to those of us involved in the center, this was kind of a search for those other forms of heritage and how to acknowledge them, give them visibility, and think of ways of preserving them. So that's been the aspiration. Frankly, it's been confusing in a lot of conversations because that's, we're kind of holding out something that seems simple and then kind of taking it away. We don't just mean capital C, capital R civil rights, iconic sites like from the 50s and 60s. We mean the long civil rights movement and other forms. So with that as our aspiration, I kind of see your book on antebellum New Orleans as a book about civil rights heritage. But I don't think everyone would agree with me.
Right.
So I don't know, how would you think about that question? I don't mean to spring it on you, but how would you think about that question?
No, I've tried to think about this a little bit and kind of frame, my understanding of preservation, the way that I practice preservation. And, at its core, historic preservation or heritage preservation is supposed to be an act of social justice, right? When the preservation movement was founded, especially in the United States, it was intended to be, a communal endeavor or something for the public good. And so preservation should be a social act that's going to intervene to protect or defend, heritage, whether we're talking about social heritage or architectural heritage, national, and that's the thing, to be national, regional, local, and so on and so forth. And so to think about that in a more expansive way is really important. And as far as preservation and civil rights and their relevance to one another, historic or heritage preservation can definitely or should address the inequities that individuals or groups or individuals have forced on marginalized communities. And just thinking about that, something that we have definitely come to realize, especially since 2020, where we have various institutions that are reckoning with their own involvement with systemic racism, is thinking about how the practice of preservation itself it often impedes that social justice. Who is doing the preserving, or whose stories we consider, or what we preserve and how we preserve it is not always an equal opportunity endeavor, right? And so being able to allow and really consider and be intentional on how we involve all members of the society in the protection of the built environment. And again, this is thinking about, preservation very broadly. And I've tended to start using the term built environment more than architecture, because we're considering the specific resource, we're considering the landscape, we're considering the people, but being intentional on allowing the full participation of society in preservation, and what we deem significant or worthy of preservation has become really important. And of course, our actual preservation legislation, Section 106 and the National Register standards are in many ways responsible for social justice issues, due to the lack of access, the perceived rigidity, actual rigidity in some cases of some of those standards and regulations, and encourages a lack of inclusiveness in preservation. So I definitely think that historic preservation, heritage preservation is something that can be, that is important for, understanding, establishing the civil rights of various groups and communities.
And and as you say, as you just finished that last sentence, that the way I see that in my mind's eye is it's small c, small r civil rights, which includes, of course, the the important and fairly well-known civil rights battles and legislation of the 50s and 60s in the South, but it's a much deeper and longer story. I also would make this connection to the the agency that you document of those 3 people of color in antebellum New Orleans. That I think we can connect pretty directly to the aspirations or the kind of renewed mission that we have in the last few years, as you say, to make the preservation field, and who has agency in the preservation field, more reflective of the whole of society. It's not as if that's a new phenomenon. It's more a matter of kind of recovering some of those stories as well, which of course, just we historians do that. That's what we do. Recover those stories, tell them better, more loudly, more convincingly. So I hope and trust that there are students who are dialed in and reading your work and saying yes, that I'm gonna write that, take that perspective on the history of a place that everybody thought they knew. Because I think that it really does have effect on, maybe not directly on the levers of power. It's not going to change the National Register criteria tomorrow, but it might change somebody's mind and how they interpret them.
Sure.
Which,
I mean, and that what you just said is really perfect, because the intent is not, and kudos to anyone who would try to do that. We're not going to rewrite the National Register standards, but to think more broadly about, what we're talking about when we talk about integrity and significance, what that means to different communities or audiences at different periods in time. And, one example that I'll, share briefly is I'm currently the chair of the State Board of Review here in Texas. And so the State Board of Review is the appointed body that basically assists the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, with the recommending resources, properties for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And so we listen to the SHPO, the history liaisons presentations on the property, and then vote, whether they should move forward. It's an advisory body. But we've had some really interesting conversations at those State Board of Review meetings. And at the last meeting, we were talking about a railroad station, architecturally significant, fantastic, but it was in the entire nomination, there had been nothing included or written in the context about segregation. And in buildings of a certain age, of a certain era, basically that story is something that's literally written on the walls, for whites, colored, waiting rooms, restrooms. It's built into the structure and the way that it's organized and designed and constructed. And just within that, there was nothing of that discussion. And so thinking how to normalize that without, of course, there's also the thing of putting, undue, stress on the preparer of nominations, on consultants, and other individuals who are doing those writings. But, just being able to automatically consider things like that, and how we make that the norm in our research, in our writing, in our preparation of these kinds of cultural resource documents for the preservation, but obviously within the standards that we have put in place, but basically how to push, thinking about how to transcend or push the boundaries of those standards without basically rewriting the law.
That's a massive responsibility and a massive job for to be head of that state board. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. So have you also seen, have you also noted, or maybe you've done yourself, acted yourself to change the kinds of sites that are coming before the board, that the SHPO is out there?
Certainly.
Maybe not just catching proposals, but out there doing proactive survey or identification.
Definitely, and thinking about, maybe people aren't going to be happy with me for saying this. I mean, because especially if we're talking about CRM work, and consultants, we're following a certain rubrics of, what the client wants within a certain budget, usually. But sometimes I think it's our duty in some ways, to be able to go beyond that a little bit in our scope, in our work, to capture as much of the history or whatever it is that's going to enrich a context, to really nail down the significance or whatever of a property, so that we can expand the kinds of resources, whether we're talking about vernacular resources or the classes of individuals, whether we're talking about women, gender issues in nominations, and in being more inclusive of those kinds of properties, different, as I said, classes, people from different socioeconomic strata, as we consider the historic resources that we're writing about in our surveys, National Register nominations, and so on and so forth. And so really seeking to identify and focus on those kinds of resources, especially since more often than not, people are already going to know about the high style works by significant architects or builders in a community. And so maybe shift those narratives a little bit is really influential. And one way that we've been trying to move towards that, in my relationship, is being on the chair of the state board, and previous to that, a member of the state board, but also as a professor, when we note properties that could use more research. And it's been really engaging and rewarding to offer student research projects on those kinds of resources, and to allow them to develop their own methodologies and think about how we find information about resources that aren't high style, and they aren't the kinds of places we look at normally.
I'm going to ask you to talk about high style for a second, because this project that you're doing on John Chase is kind of like seems like another kind of missing piece that you and your students are trying to an absence that you're trying to fill.
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to say that writing a biography is very hard. And then on, just such a pivotal and influential figure like John Chase, who, for any attendees who might not know, was among the first African-Americans to integrate the graduate school at the University of Texas. He was also the first licensed African-American architect in Texas, and had a number of other firsts and accolades throughout his career. But became a very significant architect of mid-century modern architecture in not only Texas, but nationally and internationally as well. And so seeking to, rectify the absence of information about Chase and his career, which has been hard in and of itself, because there were no firm records. There was sort of a haphazard collection or retention of materials from the firms at a couple of repositories in Houston, but really being able to piece that together. And so one of the first things I did when I started engaging in that research was to develop a list of works from stuff like his application to the AIA, the same maybe dozen resources that had been listed in, articles and other press about Chase over the course of his life and beyond, looking at the limited architectural drawings and other records that are present at those repositories in Houston. And from that list of, maybe 24 resources, a list of 300 that
Wow.
I developed. And then and since that list was sort of more or less finalized, as people have become aware that I'm engaging in this research, about 4 or 5 additional properties we've been able to attribute to John Chase and his firm.
So the 300 plus are extant buildings?
No, they're not extant, just projects that he worked on,
Okay.
or even just designed, and maybe might not necessarily have been built. But nevertheless, being able to expand that body of work and knowledge of the things that he produced, the projects that he worked on, has been wonderful. And as part of that, students were helping to sort of work on that list of works, but then also mapped the locations of that, which was
Great.
exciting for me because I'm not digitally inclined and doing mapping and GIS and all those things, although I'm learning. And so it was quite rewarding, and they were pleased to be able to contribute to that work, that research as well.
Great. Yeah, that's a powerful experience for students to, contribute to a project that's still in a process of unfolding.
Yes.
There was a note in the Q&A from our current dean, your former dean, Fritz Steiner, just thanking you for your work on John Chase.
Hi, Fritz. Thank you.
I don't think he can speak up in this format, but I'm sure he's saying something generous back to you again. Let me pivot one more turn to you mentioned students participating in that work. We have maybe 5 or so minutes left in our kind of open discussion. I did want to encourage folks to put questions or comments in the Q&A because we'll get to them in a couple of minutes. But in the vein of students working on these kinds of projects, your teaching is somewhat connected to historic preservation, but also more teaching other design students, I gather.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about the directions of preservation education? So kind of maybe not so much as, well, maybe where it is at the moment, but how you see it evolving in the future against these recent changes and the kinds of changes that you'd like to see go a little bit more deeply.
Sure. Well, I mean, it kind of boils down to what you just said. So I teach the required interior design history sequence, which is primarily interior design students, but students who are perhaps seeking to enter the program, or even just the School of Architecture might take one of those courses. I also teach American architecture, which is, a diverse group of students as well, studio students. They might be former interior design students that I have. Some of the historic preservation students that come in are required to take the American architecture class. And I also teach a course that I developed called African American Experiences in Architecture, which is a very broad survey of African American contributions to the built environment. And so I think as far as preservation and, even to a certain extent, just architectural history, education, but speaking specifically to preservation education, I think we're really good in training students in regulatory processes, but I think it would behoove us to think a bit more about how we're training future preservation and CRM professionals to more engage in more inclusive practices. So it becomes, again, the norm when you're doing something like preparing a historic context or conducting a survey for whatever client that you're going to be working for them to think about, as we already discussed, other career paths. You might not necessarily teach, you might not work for a CRM firm. What are some of those options that are available to people, which would also, I think, help to diversify the field. If people come in and understand that they don't necessarily have to be a consultant or an academic, what are some of the other areas where they might work? And also, I think that we're getting better about establishing relationships with community organizations and engaging in those partnerships, but also having, those partnerships in the community and engaging in the classroom. And so we're teaching students from ground one how to handle basically the community engagement components of preservation work as well. And just to encourage sort of more broad output, if you will. I had to start thinking about, especially as my classes were expanding and got really bogged down and quite frankly freaked out about, grading, dozens and dozens of term papers every semester. And so I started encouraging research and group projects that were creating some kind of public output. So almost a public history component of preservation work. And the students have done some really fantastic things. I've had some who have amended National Register nominations so that, they're looking at areas of significance. Once upon a time, and very early on with the establishment of the register, we had, significance discussions that are 2 paragraphs short.
Yeah,
and
we still have those in Philly too.
And they might not talk about, different ethnic communities and their contributions and so on and so forth. And so or interiors even of, a very high style theater, for example, and it talks about the exterior architecture, but nothing about the interiors. And so I've had students work on things like that. One of my preservation students, actually from one of my classes, she wrote a graphic novel on Agony, on the action group for better architecture in New York that was involved with Penn Station and basically the birth of the preservation movement. And she has now published that graphic novel and spoken about the contributions or how to visualize history of place through comics and graphic novels and things of that nature. And so, students who are creating story maps and just thinking about the methods that they've used, the sources that they've used in their work, and how to create information that, that is able to be shared with the public and sometimes can serve as a tool for social justice. Students in my African-American experiences course last fall worked very closely with a Black family here that still owns their farm that had been in place since the antebellum era. So their third great grandfather of the current owners and family members. And this property is yet again a highway in Austin is they're seeking to expand it, which would endanger that property, endanger that farm. And so the students created a website that had history, but it also had a petition on it. They were able to share information about a public hearing so that a road through that property could be renamed after Daniel Alexander, who was the patriarch of that family. And so it's gotten a lot of visibility, but also brought a lot of people's attention to the current and ongoing threats that that property faces. And so really working to engage students in that kind of work. And I think, it helps us to think about the ways in which we can offer preservation education that is more enriching for students currently in those fields or seeking to pursue those fields, but also think about who our future preservationists might be and how to capture those individuals as well.
Amen. I will second that with an optimistic note that in our second year studio yesterday, we had a workshop that was conducted by colleagues at the Black Space Collective out of New York. And it really stimulated the students to think about their personal kind of responsibilities and goals in entering into the career to do this work. In a way that I was never encouraged to think in these terms, earlier in my career. So I think that there is definitely the feeling of a different moment that is, for them starting course, for the rest of the country, for our culture, it's a very long and not very optimistic story, but for them,
Right.
it's optimism. So we'll
Good.
take that when it comes.
Definitely.
Just in the interest of time, we do have a question from our colleague Jim Buckley. Hello, Jim. Thank you for joining. And I'm just going to read his note, Tara, and ask you to respond. Says, we're excited that you've joined the board of the VAF. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Could you say a word or two about how you see the history of the ordinary built environment versus professional and architect design as a tool for understanding race and ethnicity and gender? And he says that your work on Black builders in New Orleans is a great example of this approach.
I mean, in thinking about vernacular architecture and, my work on free people of color and this work that I'm doing to identify and share the contributions of African-American builders right here in Austin, it's extremely important. I mean, we have to realize, that it's, vernacular architecture, if you will, is a representation of, the everyday people, the everyday heroes who are not only building the buildings, but, constructing the roads, taking care of the children, doing people's laundry. And so it behooves us to look at those forms and spaces, and not just for vernacular architecture, but just, architecture of the built environment in general. What has been most rewarding and appealing to me, I think, is, because of course we don't always have the information and the resources. When we're talking about vernacular architecture, we don't know who designed it. We don't know who built it necessarily, but to think about who has inhabited that space and why over a period of time. So it's increasingly become just as important to me to think about the people as the buildings themselves. And that's really how my students and I have been able to approach and discover a lot of information about the built environment, again, specifically speaking to Austin, but just in general throughout other projects that I'm working on, to think about, the people who are living in a building or using a building at a given point in time, and think about, that context to understand the architectural space. And I think that's particularly pertinent to vernacular architecture. And to really identify, but also to honor and lift up, those everyday heroes and builders of those spaces, and the inhabitants even of, someone who, within their means, or, what the materials that were available to them at a certain point in time were able to construct this house or this commercial building or whatever the case might be.
Which makes me think of the ubiquitous Philly row house that we're surrounded with here, as a form of vernacular architecture that is so, maybe just because of the sheer scale and volume of their continued existence, really present this, exactly this kind of challenge you're talking about, as if, to the extent that there aren't archives that allow us to tell buildings through typical methods, to focus more on the lives and the people. It connects directly to the present and the urgency of addressing affordable housing and how to keep families, in their row homes who have been in them for generations, but are, aging out or in gentrifying neighborhoods and need other kinds of investment to simply maintain, if not to, in air quotes, preserve the building. Just, putting a new roof on or a new boiler or some new windows is often the kind of act. So I think that has even more contemporary relevance beyond its relevance as a kind of an historical method and historical topic. But thanks for the robust answer, and thanks, Jim, for the question. I should also say that my colleagues here at Penn, Frank Matero and folks from APT and others, are putting on a row house symposium in early October to take up these and other issues of a more technical nature as well. So it's I think it's that your ideas will find fertile ground in places even well beyond Austin and Texas. So we're at just a few minutes before 1, so I don't want to keep people on past 1 o'clock. if you wanted to make any kind of final comments or other things that you wanted to mention and didn't have a chance to, there's certainly a couple minutes for that, Tara, if you like.
Oh, nothing in particular, but I suppose I can, one of the questions that you had in your notes, and it's always fun for me to know what people are working on and how they're approaching it.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'll just talk a little bit about that. So in addition to the biography on John Chase and, the burning question that people have and have asked me, is when that will be done. And we're hoping that with manuscript and reviewing the publication process, I would really hope that that is available by 2025, which would be the centennial of John Chase's birth. And so that is forthcoming, still in the works. So please do look forward to that. And one project that I'm working on right now is we're talking about maybe ideas of civil rights within our institutions and communities, but across the country, universities have come to or begun to reckon with their contributions to systemic racism. And the University of Texas is also doing something very similar, not quite so formal just yet, as other universities and colleges across the country. But we do have a campus contextualization initiative where we have various research teams that are looking at a number of things from labor on campus, history of women on campus, specifically Black women, lots of different themes. But I am specifically leading a research team on race and architecture at UT, where we are looking at the contributions of African-American builders to campus, and that has had really interesting connections to a lot of other research in Austin that I'm doing, looking at some of the freedom colonies and communities of freedmen in the Reconstruction and postbellum eras, where it's become clear that some of those individuals were actually also working on campus, and to think about the intersection of that, and really placing the University of Texas within the context of Austin and race relations in the city. I'm working on essays or chapter contributions to a number of volumes, including those looking at issues of architecture and sort of the greater Caribbean, race and historiography, a kind of broad history of the African diaspora. But as a person who's always been interested in interior design, which is something that it's lots of areas. So again, this interdisciplinary approach that's feeding it, but looking more broadly as a something that we don't really have is a history of Black interior design, and so thinking about what that is, and potentially pursuing some kind of published work on that as well.
Fantastic. Wow.
That are kind of brewing in the background.
There are always a few more books behind the ones that are already have taken some form. So you mentioned earlier that you're going to have some time to write this afternoon, so we should probably let you get to it, since you've got 3 or 4 books at least to work on. But I'm really grateful, Tara, for the time that you spent preparing for this and talking with us. And happily, folks will have this to refer back to, because it'll be on the CPCRS website with our other dialogues. But we hope we see you in Philadelphia in person sometime in the not too distant future. And in the meantime, we're grateful for your time and your work, and thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I was happy to spend some time with you all today, and thanks for the questions, and to everyone for attending.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks to Sarah Lerner and Steph Garcia behind the scenes for producing this, and for keeping up our great website, cpcrs.upenn.edu, where you can go and find lots of stuff. So Tara, thanks again, and everyone, thank you for attending. Have a great day.